The pre-dawn darkness over Edwards Air Force Base carried an unsettling stillness that Colonel Marcus Reed had never experienced in his 23 years of military service. Standing on the control tower's observation deck, he watched the first hints of sunrise paint the Mojave Desert in shades of amber and gold, but something felt fundamentally wrong about this particular morning. The base's routine operations continued below, maintenance crews preparing aircraft for the day's training exercises, security patrols making their scheduled rounds, and the distant hum of generators providing power to essential systems, yet an underlying tension seemed to permeate every interaction he observed. Over the past 48 hours, increasingly disturbing radio transmissions had been filtering in from major metropolitan areas across California, garbled messages that spoke of medical emergencies and containment failures, without providing any clear details about the nature of these crises. Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco had all gone mysteriously quiet after reporting what their emergency services initially described as widespread incidents of extreme violence and unexplained medical conditions that seemed to spread rapidly through dense population centers. Colonel Reed's contemplation was interrupted by the urgent voice of Air Traffic Controller Sergeant Lisa Park crackling through his radio. "Colonel, we have an unscheduled inbound cargo aircraft requesting immediate emergency landing clearance, civilian registration number November 74 Alpha Bravo, claiming medical emergency with multiple casualties aboard." The colonel immediately made his way to the control room, where Sergeant Park was coordinating the emergency landing procedures with practiced efficiency despite the obvious stress in her voice. The incoming aircraft, a modified C-130 Hercules typically used for civilian cargo operations, was approaching from the direction of Los Angeles and had been maintaining radio silence until just moments before requesting landing clearance. As the aircraft touched down on the main runway with a harder impact than normal, Colonel Reed noticed through his binoculars that the pilot seemed to be struggling with the controls, and several figures were visible through the aircraft's small windows, though their movements appeared strangely erratic and uncoordinated. When the cargo doors opened, a group of approximately 30 individuals emerged, many showing obvious signs of injury including torn clothing, visible wounds, and what appeared to be severe trauma to their faces and limbs. The base's medical officer, Dr. Sarah Chen, had been standing by with her emergency response team, and she immediately began triaging the casualties while noting several disturbing anomalies in their conditions. Many of the wounded displayed bite marks that didn't correspond to any known animal attacks. The wounds were clearly human in origin but showed a level of savagery that suggested extreme violence during whatever incident had occurred in Los Angeles. More troubling still, several of the victims seemed completely unresponsive to pain stimuli, showing no reaction when Dr. Chen cleaned and examined their wounds, while others displayed hyperactive behavior that required physical restraint from the medical personnel. The flight crew, Pilot Captain John Morrison, Co-Pilot First Officer Diana Torres, and Loadmaster Sergeant Rick Hamilton, appeared deeply shaken by their experience and kept exchanging nervous glances as they answered Colonel Reed's questions about the situation in Los Angeles. Their accounts were fragmented and seemingly contradictory, describing scenes of citywide chaos, abandoned emergency services, and masses of people exhibiting violent and irrational behavior that had forced them to evacuate their cargo terminal with whatever civilians they could safely transport. As Dr. Chen worked in the base medical facility, she began noticing increasingly strange behavior from several of the patients, particularly their complete lack of response to medical procedures and their fixation on the medical staff rather than their own severe injuries. The situation deteriorated rapidly when one of the apparent victims, a middle-aged man with severe facial lacerations who had been lying motionless on an examination table, suddenly lunged at Nurse Patricia Williams with inhuman strength and speed, his movements jerky and unnatural but driven by what appeared to be an insatiable hunger for human flesh. His eyes were clouded with a milky film, and his jaw moved with a mechanical grinding motion as he attempted to bite the terrified nurse, who barely escaped when Dr. Chen struck the attacker with a medical instrument. The blow that should have incapacitated any normal person barely slowed the assailant, who continued his relentless pursuit until security personnel arrived to restrain him, but even then, his strength seemed far beyond what his injuries should have allowed. Base alarms began blaring throughout Edwards Air Force Base as Dr. Chen's panicked radio calls reported the attack, and Colonel Reed realized with growing horror that they were facing something far beyond a conventional medical emergency when he witnessed the injured nurse, despite suffering what should have been fatal wounds during the attack, slowly rising from the medical facility floor with the same clouded eyes and mechanical movements, her jaw hanging at an unnatural angle as she turned toward other personnel with the same predatory hunger that had consumed her attacker. Edwards Air Force Base transformed from a routine military installation into a fortress under siege within minutes of the first attack, as Colonel Reed's emergency protocols activated with mechanical precision while chaos erupted throughout the medical facility. The base's communication systems immediately went into high alert mode, with Sergeant Park coordinating with all department heads to establish a complete lockdown perimeter around the compromised medical building. But the infected individuals who had arrived on the cargo plane were revealing themselves to be far more than simple medical casualties. Captain Jake Morrison, the base's lead test pilot, had been conducting pre-flight checks on his F-22 Raptor when the alarms began sounding, and he immediately abandoned his aircraft to join Colonel Reed's emergency response team, bringing with him Lieutenant Sofia Vasquez, a combat-experienced pilot recently transferred from overseas operations, and Major Tom Bradley, the base's senior tactical operations officer who had been reviewing training schedules when the crisis began. The infected displayed behavior that defied every medical and tactical manual the military personnel had ever studied, showing complete immunity to pain while pursuing living humans with relentless determination that never seemed to diminish despite severe injuries that should have incapacitated or killed any normal person. Traditional small arms fire from the base security forces could slow the infected individuals and knock them down temporarily, but unless the shot specifically targeted the head area, the creatures would continue rising and resuming their attacks with the same mechanical persistence that characterized their movements. Dr. Chen, now barricaded inside her laboratory with whatever medical supplies and equipment she could gather, worked frantically to analyze blood samples from the infected while maintaining radio contact with Colonel Reed's command team, her preliminary findings suggesting that some form of pathogen was attacking the nervous system while simultaneously reanimating dead tissue in ways that violated every principle of human biology she had learned during her medical training. The base's advanced communication array began receiving scattered emergency transmissions from military installations across the southwestern United States, with similar reports of mysterious outbreaks involving individuals who displayed the same violent behavior and apparent immunity to conventional stopping methods that Edwards was experiencing. Fort Irwin reported that an entire convoy of evacuees from San Bernardino had turned hostile after arriving at their facility, while Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada described a complete communications blackout from Las Vegas after their reconnaissance flights observed massive crowds of people moving through the city streets in coordinated groups that seemed to be hunting for survivors. The pattern of reports suggested that whatever was happening at Edwards was part of a much larger crisis that was spreading across major population centers with unprecedented speed and coordination. Captain Morrison volunteered to conduct an immediate aerial reconnaissance mission over the surrounding areas, taking his F-22 on a high-speed survey flight that would provide real-time intelligence about the situation beyond the base perimeter while maintaining enough altitude and speed to avoid any ground-based threats. His radio transmissions during the 40-minute flight painted an increasingly horrifying picture of the region's condition, with entire suburban communities appearing abandoned except for large groups of infected individuals who moved through neighborhoods in searching patterns that suggested they were systematically hunting for any remaining survivors. The cities of Lancaster and Palmdale showed clear signs of recent violence and destruction, with numerous fires burning uncontrolled and no evidence of organized emergency response or law enforcement activity. When Captain Morrison returned from his reconnaissance flight, the aerial footage captured by his aircraft's sophisticated camera systems revealed the true scope of the crisis facing not just Edwards Air Force Base but the entire region and potentially the nation. Massive hordes of infected individuals, numbering in the tens of thousands, were moving across the landscape in loose formations that seemed to follow major highways and transportation corridors toward remaining population centers. The infected displayed pack-like coordination when encountering obstacles or potential prey, with some individuals serving as scouts while others flanked and surrounded targets in ways that suggested retained tactical thinking despite their otherwise mindless appearance. The surviving crew members from the cargo plane that had brought the infection to Edwards finally revealed the complete truth about their evacuation from Los Angeles International Airport, describing how the city had fallen to overwhelming numbers of these creatures within approximately 6 hours of the first reported incidents. Their aircraft had been one of the last to escape the airport before infected individuals overran the runways and terminals, and they had witnessed other evacuation flights being forced down when infected passengers revealed themselves mid-flight, creating aerial disasters that eliminated some of humanity's most viable escape routes. The crew's testimony confirmed Colonel Reed's worst fears about the spread and coordination of the infection, while simultaneously providing crucial intelligence about the infected individual's apparent attraction to sound, movement, and large gatherings of uninfected humans, behavioral patterns that would prove essential for developing effective survival and combat strategies in the desperate hours and days ahead. The grim reality of their situation became undeniably clear when Colonel Reed's tactical assessment revealed that traditional ground-based evacuation routes were completely compromised, with infected hordes approaching Edwards Air Force Base from every direction in numbers that would overwhelm any conventional defensive perimeter within hours of their arrival. The colonel made the unprecedented decision to transform their military aircraft into flying command centers and living quarters, recognizing that their only chance of survival lay in establishing a completely aerial-based operation that could maintain mobility while continuing rescue and reconnaissance missions across the infected territories. Major Bradley immediately began coordinating with the base's engineering teams to modify their largest transport aircraft, installing additional fuel systems, improvised sleeping quarters, and communication equipment that would allow them to operate independently of ground-based facilities for extended periods, while Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Vasquez worked with maintenance crews to prepare their fighter aircraft for unconventional missions that would require creative tactics and exceptional piloting skills. Dr. Chen's continued analysis of the infected individual's blood samples and behavioral patterns revealed several crucial discoveries that would prove essential for developing effective survival strategies, including the finding that the pathogen responsible for the infection spread primarily through direct contact with bodily fluids but showed significant weaknesses in its ability to coordinate complex problem-solving tasks. The infected were highly attracted to sound and movement, particularly loud noises and rapid motion, but their individual intelligence appeared severely limited, making them vulnerable to tactical misdirection and coordination failures when separated from larger groups. This intelligence led to the development of innovative aerial herding techniques, where the squadron's faster aircraft could use engine noise and low-altitude passes to guide infected masses away from survivor settlements that they had identified during reconnaissance flights, essentially using the creature's behavioral predictability against them in large-scale population management operations. Lieutenant Vasquez volunteered for the most dangerous missions, conducting low-altitude supply drops to isolated survivor groups while simultaneously mapping safe zones and potential landing sites across the region, her exceptional flying skills and combat experience making her uniquely qualified for operations that required precision navigation through areas populated by infected individuals who had learned to climb structures and coordinate their movements to threaten aircraft during landing and takeoff procedures. Her detailed reconnaissance reports revealed that scattered groups of survivors were still holding out in fortified positions throughout Southern California, including military personnel at various installations, civilian groups barricaded in shopping centers and office buildings, and even some families who had managed to secure rural properties with natural defensive advantages that kept them relatively safe from infected incursions. Major Bradley's engineering background proved invaluable as he worked with the base's technical specialists to develop improvised weapon systems that could be deployed from their aircraft against large concentrations of infected individuals, creating everything from precision-guided explosive devices that could break up massive hordes to sonic weapons that exploited the creature's attraction to sound by overwhelming their primitive nervous systems with frequencies that caused disorientation and coordination failures. These innovations required constant testing and refinement, as the infected seemed to adapt their behavior patterns in response to repeated exposure to the same tactical approaches, forcing the squadron to continuously develop new methods and strategies to maintain their effectiveness in combat situations. The establishment of communication networks with other surviving military units across the United States provided both hope and additional challenges, as Colonel Reed's team discovered that similar aerial operations were being attempted at installations throughout the country, with varying degrees of success depending on local resources, personnel expertise, and the specific characteristics of infected populations in different regions. Air Force bases in Texas, Colorado, and the Pacific Northwest reported modest success with aerial evacuation operations, while installations closer to major metropolitan areas faced overwhelming infected populations that made any ground-based operations virtually impossible, forcing a complete reliance on airborne tactics that stretched equipment and personnel beyond their normal operational limits. The infected continued to demonstrate disturbing evolutionary behaviors that threatened the squadron's aerial advantage, with some individuals showing increased climbing abilities that allowed them to reach elevated positions where aircraft were forced to land or hover during rescue operations, while others displayed pack coordination that enabled them to surround and trap potential victims in ways that suggested primitive tactical thinking despite their apparent lack of individual intelligence. These developments forced constant adaptation of operational procedures, with every mission requiring careful planning to account for the infected's growing sophistication in hunting and trapping behaviors, while the squadron worked desperately to stay ahead of the creature's learning curve in what was becoming an increasingly complex battle for survival against an enemy that seemed to evolve new capabilities with each encounter. The transformed squadron's reputation as humanity's aerial lifeline spread rapidly through the fragmented network of survivor communities across the southwestern United States, with desperate radio transmissions arriving hourly from isolated groups who had monitored their rescue operations and were pleading for evacuation from increasingly dangerous situations where infected populations continued to grow and coordinate their hunting strategies. Captain Morrison emerged as the squadron's premier rescue specialist, developing innovative precision extraction techniques that involved everything from rooftop helicopter-style landings using modified cargo aircraft to high-speed cable rescue systems that could lift survivors from buildings without requiring the aircraft to land in areas compromised by infected individuals. His methods required split-second timing and exceptional piloting skills, as infected groups had learned to anticipate rescue attempts and would mass around potential extraction sites, creating deadly gauntlets that rescue aircraft had to navigate while maintaining the stability necessary for successful survivor pickup operations. Dr. Chen's mobile laboratory aboard their primary transport aircraft had become a crucial resource for understanding the infection's progression and developing countermeasures, her continuous research revealing important discoveries about transmission patterns, incubation periods, and potential vulnerabilities in the pathogen structure that might eventually lead to treatment options for those in early stages of infection. Working with limited equipment in constantly moving aircraft presented extraordinary challenges, but her dedication to finding solutions never wavered despite the dangerous conditions and emotional stress of witnessing the infection's devastating effects on rescued survivors who had been exposed but not yet fully transformed. Her findings indicated that the pathogen had multiple stages of development within infected hosts, with initial exposure creating behavioral changes before the complete loss of cognitive function that characterized fully transformed individuals. The squadron's rescue operations brought them into contact with diverse survivor groups that provided invaluable intelligence about the outbreak's origins and spread patterns, including National Guard units who had been conducting their own resistance operations, civilian pilots who had been running supply missions between isolated communities, and research scientists from various institutions who carried crucial data about biological research projects that might be connected to the infection's development. Lieutenant Vasquez coordinated these intelligence-gathering efforts while continuing her high-risk reconnaissance flights, her exceptional abilities allowing her to map infected population movements and identify optimal rescue windows when survivor extraction could be accomplished with minimal risk to both rescue personnel and the individuals being evacuated from hostile territory. During one of their most challenging operations, the squadron received an emergency transmission from a children's hospital in Riverside where medical staff and young patients had been trapped for days while infected individuals systematically searched the building for any remaining uninfected humans. The hospital's complex structure, with multiple floors, stairwells, and patient rooms, had become a deadly maze where infected individuals used their pack coordination to trap potential victims by blocking escape routes and coordinating their attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Lieutenant Vasquez led the reconnaissance phase of the operation, using her aircraft sensors to map the building's infected population and identify the safest approach routes, while Captain Morrison prepared specialized equipment for extracting survivors from upper floors without compromising the aircraft's ability to escape if the situation deteriorated rapidly. The hospital rescue operation revealed disturbing new developments in infected behavior, as the creatures demonstrated an understanding of building infrastructure that allowed them to manipulate elevators, stairwell access, and even ventilation systems to create elaborate traps for uninfected humans who might attempt to move through the facility. Major Bradley's analysis of the infected individuals' tactical coordination suggested that certain individuals within infected groups possessed retained cognitive abilities that enabled them to direct group behavior and develop increasingly sophisticated hunting strategies, a finding that fundamentally changed the squadron's understanding of the threat they were facing and required immediate revision of their operational protocols. The establishment of communication networks with surviving air traffic controllers provided the squadron with a crucial advantage in coordinating their expanding rescue operations, as these experienced professionals could guide aircraft through optimal flight paths while providing real-time intelligence about weather conditions, fuel availability, and potential landing sites that remained secure from infected populations. Major Bradley worked closely with these controllers to establish a network of emergency landing zones equipped with basic supplies and communication equipment, though maintaining the security of these sites required constant vigilance as infected groups seemed to develop an awareness of the location's importance and would mount coordinated attacks designed to eliminate humanity's aerial infrastructure. The squadron's growing reputation for successful rescue operations created both opportunities and dangers, as more survivor groups attempted to signal for help while infected populations appeared to recognize the aircraft as significant threats to their expansion and began developing countermeasures that included coordinated attacks on landing sites and attempts to damage aircraft through thrown debris and organized climbing efforts that could reach surprising heights when multiple infected individuals worked together to create human ladders capable of threatening low-flying rescue aircraft during critical extraction phases of their missions. The squadron's most terrifying discovery came during a routine reconnaissance flight when Lieutenant Vasquez observed something that defied every assumption they had made about infected behavior patterns. Massive groups of infected individuals, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, were moving across the landscape in coordinated migrations that followed strategic routes toward major population centers where survivors were known to be sheltering. These superhordes displayed a level of collective intelligence that suggested some form of communication or leadership structure existed within infected populations, with scouts moving ahead of the main groups to identify obstacles and potential food sources while the primary masses followed predetermined paths that avoided natural barriers and military installations that might pose threats to their advancement. The implications of this coordinated movement were staggering, as it meant the infected were not simply wandering aimlessly but were actively hunting remaining human populations with tactical precision that rivaled organized military campaigns. Colonel Reed's analysis of the migration patterns revealed that the largest of these hordes, estimated to contain over 100,000 infected individuals, was moving steadily toward Las Vegas, where intelligence reports suggested thousands of survivors had fortified themselves within the casino district's naturally defensible buildings and underground tunnel systems. The horde's projected arrival time gave the squadron less than 72 hours to develop and implement a strategy that could either redirect the massive group or eliminate enough of its leadership elements to disrupt the coordinated advance before it reached the city's defensive perimeter. Dr. Chen's research had identified certain infected individuals who appeared to serve as coordinators or directors for larger groups, their destruction often causing temporary confusion and disorganization among surrounding infected populations, suggesting that targeted elimination of these key individuals might be an effective strategy for disrupting the superhorde's advance. The squadron's desperate preparation for intercepting the Las Vegas-bound horde led to the development of their most ambitious tactical operation yet, combining precision airstrikes against identified leadership targets with psychological warfare techniques designed to exploit the infected's behavioral predictabilities and create chaos within their coordinated formations. Dr. Chen's latest research breakthrough involved the discovery that certain electromagnetic frequencies could disorient infected individuals by interfering with whatever neural pathways allowed them to coordinate their movements, leading to the hasty development of sonic weapons that could be deployed from aircraft to create zones of confusion within infected groups. Major Bradley coordinated the technical implementation of these new weapon systems while simultaneously planning conventional explosive strikes against the Horde's most densely populated sections, hoping to fragment the massive group into smaller, more manageable units that could be dealt with using established tactics. Captain Morrison volunteered for what amounted to a suicide mission, piloting a specially modified aircraft loaded with experimental explosives directly into the heart of the migrating Horde to plant charges that would redirect the group's movement toward uninhabited desert areas rather than allowing them to continue toward Las Vegas. The plan required him to land his aircraft in the middle of the infected mass, activate timing devices on the explosive charges, and then attempt to take off again before the infected could overwhelm his position, a sequence of actions that would require perfect timing and extraordinary luck to execute successfully. The mission's complexity increased dramatically when aerial reconnaissance revealed that the infected had developed countermeasures against aircraft, including coordinated throwing of debris and the formation of human pyramids that could reach surprising heights when hundreds of infected individuals worked together to create living towers capable of threatening low-flying aircraft. The operation began to unravel when Captain Morrison's aircraft experienced mechanical difficulties during the approach phase, forcing him to abort the planned landing sequence and attempt an emergency extraction while the infected Horde began demonstrating unprecedented problem-solving abilities that included using abandoned vehicles and building debris to create barriers that could trap aircraft during landing attempts. Lieutenant Vasquez immediately launched her own aircraft to provide air support for Morrison's extraction, engaging in a desperate aerial battle against infected individuals who had learned to use thrown objects as weapons, while Major Bradley coordinated with surviving ground forces from nearby military installations to provide diversionary attacks that might draw some of the Horde's attention away from the trapped aircraft. The battle for Captain Morrison's extraction became a pivotal moment in the squadron's understanding of their enemy's capabilities, as the infected demonstrated not only tactical coordination but also adaptive learning that allowed them to modify their behavior in real time to counter the human tactics being used against them. The Superhorde's response to the aerial assault revealed layers of organization and strategic thinking that transformed the squadron's perception of the infected from mindless creatures driven by basic hunger to an intelligent enemy capable of military-level planning and execution, fundamentally changing the nature of humanity's struggle for survival and forcing a complete reevaluation of every strategy and assumption that had guided their operations since the outbreak began. The infected's rapid adaptation to the squadron's aerial tactics reached a terrifying new level when reconnaissance flights began documenting specialized variants that possessed abilities specifically designed to counter humanity's last remaining advantages, with some infected individuals displaying enhanced jumping capabilities that allowed them to leap from rooftops and elevated structures to reach aircraft during critical landing and takeoff phases of rescue operations. Dr. Chen's analysis of captured specimens revealed that the pathogen responsible for the infection was continuing to mutate within infected hosts, creating distinct subspecies with different physical capabilities and behavioral patterns that suggested the infection was not a static condition but an evolving biological weapon that adapted to overcome whatever resistance strategies humans developed against it. The most disturbing variants included climbers who could scale vertical surfaces with spider-like agility, reaching heights that had previously been considered safe zones for aircraft operations, and callers whose clicking vocalizations could summon other infected individuals from distances of several miles, effectively turning any encounter with these specialized infected into a trap that would quickly attract overwhelming numbers of additional threats. Colonel Reed's tactical assessments became increasingly grim as reports arrived from international military forces describing similar variant evolution in infected populations worldwide, confirming that this adaptive capability was a fundamental characteristic of the pathogen rather than a localized phenomenon unique to their region. European air forces reported encounters with infected individuals who had developed primitive tool use, employing everything from thrown rocks to makeshift spears with deadly accuracy against low-flying aircraft, while Asian military units described infected groups that had learned to coordinate complex ambush tactics using urban infrastructure to create elaborate traps for rescue operations. The global scope of the variant evolution suggested that humanity was facing an enemy that was literally evolving faster than human military and scientific resources could develop countermeasures, creating a strategic nightmare where every successful tactic would eventually be neutralized by infected adaptation. Captain Morrison's harrowing escape from the superhorde had provided crucial intelligence about the infected's most advanced capabilities, but it had also revealed the existence of what Dr. Chen termed alpha variants, infected individuals who retained significant portions of their human intelligence while gaining the enhanced physical capabilities and coordination abilities of their transformed state. These alpha variants appeared to serve as battlefield commanders for infected groups, directing tactical movements and coordinating complex operations that required strategic thinking and long-term planning capabilities that should have been impossible for creatures supposedly driven only by basic hunger and aggression. The implications of intelligent infected leadership were staggering, as it meant the enemy could not only adapt to human tactics but could actively develop counter-strategies and potentially even anticipate future human operations based on observed patterns and behaviors. Lieutenant Vasquez led a reconnaissance mission to investigate reports of an abandoned Centers for Disease Control research facility in Nevada that might contain crucial data about the outbreak's origins and the pathogen's designed capabilities. But reaching the facility required penetrating an area heavily populated with the new intelligent variants that had established what appeared to be organized territorial control over the surrounding region. The mission's complexity increased dramatically when aerial surveillance revealed that the infected had created structured defensive positions around the facility, using abandoned vehicles and building materials to construct barriers and observation posts that suggested military-level tactical understanding and the ability to implement coordinated defensive strategies that could effectively counter traditional human assault techniques. Major Bradley's engineering expertise became essential as the squadron worked to develop new aircraft modifications that could counter the infected's evolving capabilities, including enhanced armor systems that could protect against thrown projectiles, sonic weapons designed to exploit the clicking communication systems used by caller variants, and specialized landing gear that would allow aircraft to operate from smaller, more defensible landing zones that the infected would have difficulty accessing or surrounding. The constant arms race between human innovation and infected adaptation created a desperate cycle where every technological advantage gained by the squadron would be neutralized within days or weeks by new infected capabilities, forcing continuous research and development efforts that stretched their limited resources and personnel to breaking points while the enemy continued to grow stronger and more sophisticated with each passing day. The discovery that some infected individuals retained fragments of their human memories created both opportunities and dangers for the squadron's operations, as these partially aware infected could potentially be communicated with or reasoned with in limited circumstances, but they also possessed intimate knowledge of human behavior patterns and tactical preferences that made them extraordinarily dangerous opponents capable of predicting and countering human strategies with uncanny accuracy. That transformed every encounter into a deadly chess match where the infected held significant advantages in both numbers and increasingly sophisticated intelligence capabilities. The squadron's strategic situation reached a critical turning point when Colonel Reed made the unprecedented decision to abandon traditional evacuation and containment strategies in favor of establishing permanent aerial colonies that could serve as humanity's last bastions while simultaneously working toward a long-term solution to the infected crisis. Dr. Chen's breakthrough analysis of naturally immune individuals they had rescued during their operations revealed crucial genetic markers that suggested a potential pathway to developing both a cure for early-stage infections and a vaccine that could provide immunity to the pathogen. But implementing this research would require establishing a secure ground-based laboratory facility equipped with sophisticated equipment that could only be obtained from abandoned research institutions scattered across infected territory. The audacious plan involved creating a fortified research compound that could withstand coordinated attacks from the evolved infected variants while providing Dr. Chen with the resources necessary to complete her work on what might be humanity's only hope for reclaiming their world from the intelligent infected populations that continued to expand their territorial control. The selection of an appropriate location for the research facility became a complex tactical challenge that required balancing accessibility for supply flights against defensibility from infected attacks, while also ensuring proximity to abandoned research installations that contained the specialized equipment Dr. Chen needed for her advanced pathogen analysis and cure development work. Major Bradley's reconnaissance identified a decommissioned military research facility in the mountains of Colorado that offered natural defensive advantages and contained much of the required laboratory infrastructure, but reaching and securing the location would require the most dangerous operation the squadron had ever attempted, involving simultaneous combat missions against multiple infected strongholds while establishing supply lines through territory controlled by Alpha variants who had demonstrated the ability to coordinate complex defensive strategies against aerial assault operations. The infected population seemed to possess an almost supernatural awareness of the research facility's importance to human survival efforts, launching coordinated attacks against any location where the squadron attempted to establish permanent operations with a level of tactical sophistication that suggested they understood the strategic implications of preventing human scientific advancement. These attacks involved multivariant cooperation on an unprecedented scale, with climber variants scaling defensive positions while caller variants summoned massive reinforcements and alpha variants directed complex siege operations that utilized abandoned military equipment and infrastructure in ways that demonstrated not only retained human knowledge but active learning and adaptation of human military tactics for use against their former species. Captain Morrison emerged as the leader of the squadron's most dangerous missions, coordinating increasingly desperate holding actions against infected forces that seemed to grow more organized and tactically sophisticated with each encounter, while Lieutenant Vasquez managed the critical supply runs that kept the research facility operational despite constant threats from infected populations that had learned to anticipate and counter aerial supply operations using coordinated anti-aircraft tactics involving thrown debris and coordinated climbing attacks. The psychological toll of these operations weighed heavily on all personnel, as they witnessed firsthand the infected systematic destruction of human civilization while fighting a seemingly hopeless battle against an enemy that adapted faster than human countermeasures could be developed and implemented. Dr. Chen's work progressed under extraordinary pressure as infected forces mounted increasingly sophisticated attacks against the research facility, her analysis revealing that the pathogen possessed designed characteristics that suggested artificial creation rather than natural evolution, leading to the disturbing possibility that the outbreak had been intentionally released as a biological weapon that was specifically engineered to overcome human immune systems and create the observed variants with their specialized capabilities. The discovery of partially aware infected individuals who retained fragments of their human memories created both research opportunities and profound ethical dilemmas, as these individuals could provide crucial information about the infection's progression while simultaneously representing former friends, colleagues, and family members whose personalities had been partially preserved within their transformed states. The research facility's defensive situation deteriorated rapidly when infected forces began demonstrating coordinated siege tactics that involved systematic destruction of the facility's infrastructure while simultaneously cutting off aerial supply routes through coordinated attacks against landing zones and supply aircraft, forcing the squadron to develop increasingly creative and dangerous resupply methods that pushed their equipment and personnel beyond safe operational limits. The infected's ability to learn from each defensive success achieved by the human forces meant that every tactical victory was temporary, as the enemy would quickly adapt their strategies to counter whatever defensive measures had proven effective, creating a constantly evolving battle where human survival depended on staying one step ahead of an enemy that possessed both superior numbers and accelerating tactical intelligence. The climactic phase of the research facility operation began when Dr. Chen announced that she had successfully developed both a treatment capable of reversing early-stage infections and an immunity serum that could protect uninfected individuals from the pathogen, but distributing these medical breakthroughs would require the squadron to reach survivor enclaves across a continent now dominated by evolved infected populations who seemed to understand that preventing the cure's distribution was essential for maintaining their control over human territory and ensuring the continued expansion of their transformed civilization. The final confrontation for humanity's survival began when massive coordinated forces of evolved infected launched their most sophisticated assault yet against the Mountain Research Facility, demonstrating military-level tactical coordination that included simultaneous attacks from multiple directions, systematic destruction of defensive positions, and coordinated efforts to eliminate the squadron's aircraft before they could escape with Dr. Chen's life-saving medical discoveries. Colonel Reed coordinated the desperate defense while every remaining pilot pushed their aircraft and combat skills to absolute limits, engaging in aerial combat that combined traditional fighter tactics with improvised strategies designed to counter the infected's anti-aircraft capabilities, including their coordinated throwing of debris and their ability to create human towers that could reach surprising heights when attacking landing aircraft. The battle evolved into a complex three-dimensional engagement where aerial combat, ground defense, and facility evacuation had to be coordinated simultaneously while infected forces demonstrated their most advanced capabilities, including the use of captured military equipment and the implementation of siege tactics that revealed their complete understanding of human military doctrine and strategic planning. Dr. Chen's successful completion of both the infection reversal treatment and the immunity serum represented humanity's greatest scientific achievement since the outbreak began, but the practical challenges of mass production and global distribution seemed insurmountable given the infected's territorial control over most major population centers and their apparent understanding that preventing the cure's spread was essential for maintaining their dominance over human civilization. The treatment required precise dosing and administration procedures that could only be performed by trained medical personnel, while the immunity serum needed to be distributed to uninfected populations before they encountered infected individuals, creating logistical challenges that would require unprecedented coordination between scattered survivor groups and military units across multiple continents while under constant threat from infected forces that had demonstrated their ability to adapt rapidly to any human strategy or defensive measure. Captain Morrison's heroic sacrifice during the facility's final evacuation became a turning point in the battle, as he volunteered to pilot the slowest transport aircraft loaded with the most critical medical supplies and research data while drawing the infected's primary assault forces away from the other escaping aircraft, engaging in a running aerial battle that allowed Lieutenant Vasquez and Major Bradley to escape with Dr. Chen and the bulk of the medical supplies needed for establishing treatment centers in distant survivor settlements. His final radio transmission, broadcast on all emergency frequencies, provided crucial tactical intelligence about the infected's coordinated attack patterns while simultaneously serving as inspiration for other surviving military units who had been monitoring the research facility's desperate defense. His courage and sacrifice galvanizing resistance efforts across the continent as surviving humans realized that effective treatments for the infection had finally been developed and that victory against the infected was potentially achievable. Lieutenant Vasquez assumed leadership of the distribution missions, coordinating with Major Bradley to establish a network of aerial treatment centers that could reach isolated survivor enclaves while maintaining the mobility necessary to avoid the infected's increasingly sophisticated anti-aircraft efforts. Her exceptional piloting skills and combat experience proving essential for navigating the dangerous airspace over infected territory while carrying precious medical cargo that represented humanity's only hope for reclaiming their world. The distribution network required constant adaptation and innovation as infected forces developed new countermeasures against the medical supply flights, including coordinated attacks on landing sites and systematic efforts to eliminate survivor groups before they could receive treatment, creating a desperate race against time where human survival depended on delivering the cure faster than the infected could prevent its distribution. The cure's effectiveness exceeded even Dr. Chen's most optimistic projections, with early-stage infected individuals showing complete recovery within hours of treatment administration and immunity serum proving nearly 100% effective in preventing new infections among treated populations. But the logistical challenges of reaching every survivor group while maintaining security against evolved infected attacks required unprecedented cooperation between military units, civilian organizations, and international relief efforts that had to be coordinated across vast distances using improvised communication networks. Major Bradley's establishment of fortified aerial bases provided staging areas for the distribution efforts while serving as training centers where recovered individuals could learn to assist with treatment operations, gradually expanding the network of personnel capable of administering the cure and building the foundation for organized resistance against infected territorial control. Colonel Reed's reflection on their losses and victories revealed the true scope of their achievement as he watched the first groups of cured individuals working alongside uninfected survivors to establish secure ground settlements that could serve as bases for gradually reclaiming infected territories. The sight of humans working together to rebuild civilization providing hope that had seemed impossible during the darkest days of the outbreak. Though infected populations remained a significant threat requiring constant vigilance and continued military operations, humanity now possessed the tools and knowledge necessary to slowly reverse the outbreak's devastation, with the squadron continuing their missions as guardians of the sky while settlements below began the long but hopeful process of rebuilding their world. Their aerial patrols serving as symbols of human resilience and determination that had refused to surrender even when facing an enemy that seemed capable of adapting to counter every strategy they developed.